Mari Reesberg. Over the past several years, I've combined my degrees in acting and somatic psychology to share my sustaining creativity techniques with performers. And now I've decided to share it with a bigger audience that includes you. I believe we are all creative, and this podcast is all about that. I'll be interviewing people from all backgrounds, ages, and creativity experiences to share just how creative we all are. Today, I'll be chatting with Talor Stewart, architect and author of Conscious Home Design. Please enjoy Talor Stewart. Welcome to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. Today, I'm chatting with Talor Stewart, architect and author of Conscious Home Design. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Mari. Great to be here with you today. I'm so excited to talk about this. Creativity is at the heart of everything I do, and I get so much energy and inspiration from connecting with other creatives. I'm really glad to be on the podcast. Thanks for having me.
I love hearing that. I too experience such a charge and recharge talking about creativity. So I can't wait to dig into it. But before we get there, why don't you let our listeners know a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm talking with you today from my studio in Vermont, but I work all over the country. I'm a licensed architect. I've been in the industry for 25 years, and I wrote a book called Conscious Home Design after 20 years. So it's actually just about 7 years ago. It came out in 2019. So actually, it's more than 25 years I've been in the industry. Anyway, I wrote that book after a couple decades of experience, sort of boiling down what the process was, and for me, so much about architecture and design is there's a lot of style forward practitioners out there. I really wanted to understand and shift the approach to be human first and more about what makes people actually happy. Because everyone's out there throwing this flag around, hey, live your best life. But what does that actually look like? What does that mean? Obviously it's going to be different for different people. We all have different joys, and ways that our best life shows up for us. But there, underneath of that, are there any scientific or universal principles that apply to all people that we can start with? And so I found that the quality of your question determines the quality of your results. And if you ask good questions, you get a good outcome. And if someone comes and says, hey, I want to shift my house, I want to make some changes, whether that's just a minor redecorating or a major renovation or even building a brand new home, people come with their wish list. Hey, I want this, that, and the other thing. And here's a few things that I've had in the past that didn't work, so we want to avoid that. People know what they want and what they don't want. But I've, found that sometimes that list, while great and touches on some major points, there may be a few missing pieces that they forgot to ask or didn't even know to ask in the first place. And so I want to make sure that we leave no stone unturned. And so the Conscious Home Design book is saying, hey, here are the big nuggets. I remember seeing some high school teacher talking about this. It was priorities. It was a video on YouTube. I saw it maybe 10 or 15 years ago. Big jar on the desk and some rocks and some pebbles and some sand, and he was saying if you put in the small things first, there won't be room for the big stones, and those are the important things in your life. So you got to put those in first into the jar to make sure that you've got room, and then you can fill up the spaces with the smaller stuff. And so Conscious Home Design book was an exploration into the deeper knowledge that actually makes people happy, rather than just aesthetic preference. Oh, I like blue, I like green, which does matter. That is important. But there are things, universally, whether you like blue or green, there's still some things underneath of that are. So that's what Conscious Home Design is all about, is starting with those things, because if the home is really beautiful but doesn't fit, then it's not going to flow for day to
Mm-hmm.
day. And it may satisfy you intellectually to look at it, but your experience on a daily basis is going to be one of friction.
Mm,
And so and so we want to create space that actually helps you grow and do what you do and be who you're going to be, and sort of lift you into your goals, and your lifestyle flow. And
mm,
then once we have that function is sort of hammered out, then we lay the ornamentation and the beauty of what you want on that framework. So
mm.
it's sort of an inside out approach, if
Yeah,
that
I,
makes
I
sense.
love to hear that. I love the the deeper layer. I mean, I'm also a therapist, so I'm always about the deeper layer
Cool.
and the
Yeah.
what's underneath and why do we put things together. I had the opportunity to take a look at Conscious Home Design book and your workbook, and I'm so
Oh, good.
fascinated by all of the pieces and the questions and how you get to the heart of what
Hmm.
is going to work for an individual or a family or a partnership in their
Yes.
living space and those relationships. I absolutely want to talk more about those pieces because it's
Sure.
fascinating to me.
Sure.
But I'm curious if, because we're here to talk about creativity, I wonder if you could share when you think of creativity, what does it mean to you to be creative?
Oh, I believe, it's my understanding that human beings, as a fundamental quality of being human, creativity is embedded in that. It's part of our DNA. And even people who say, "Oh, I don't have a creative bone in my body," they perhaps they're living a very sort of analytical life or a very methodical life. I still, creativity doesn't I think they just haven't been encouraged to think of creativity outside of a box. Like they
Mm,
may say, "Oh, well, creative means they're painting or they're dancing, some sort of performing arts or visual arts, and that's what creativity means to them." But creativity shows up everywhere, in terms of you just maybe planning your meal, or the way you
mm,
put the food on the plate, could be creativity. It may be the plants you choose for your garden or your flower bed in front. That's can be creative. It might be the solution you come up for organizing. You could be an accountant, which is not typically not thought of as a very creative profession, but maybe the way you organize your the spreadsheets, or the way you connect with your clients, and the process
mhm.
you get through. There's creativity shows up in very subtle ways, but it's everywhere. It's what drives the human race to create new things. So being creative to me is it's um it's already there. It's
Mm.
just being sensitive to how it shows up for you, I think.
Mm. I love that. And I hear the literal direct connection to the work that you do in that definition that you just
Oh
gave.
yeah.
Yeah.
What in what way?
In the way of like all of the pieces are there. It's about asking the question in the
Uh,
right way
Right.
to
Uh-huh.
draw out what people are, what brings that happiness or what brings that
Hmm.
functionality to a
Hmm.
space
Hmm.
or the livableness that
Hmm.
is not, when we have something in our mind of the perfect, I'm using big air quotes, the perfect space
Sure.
versus
Yeah.
what's actually going to work for
Yeah.
you as a person. So it's all there. We just have to
It is a
tease
drawing
it
out.
apart.
Whether it's wisdom or creativity or
Hmm.
education. I mean, all of these things really are a drawing out, not a pumping in. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
wisdom and creativity is not pumping in knowledge from the outside. It's drawing what some piece of you deep down knows, either experientially or
Yeah.
intuitively, from
Mm.
from within. And so,
Hmm.
it's not my job as an architect to say, "Hey, you need to have this and this and this." My job is just to remember to ask that question. "Hey, what do you like to do for creative activity? What do you like to do for personal
Yeah.
development? What do you
Mm.
like to do for self-improvement activities?"
Hmm.
Most architects don't ask questions that specific or that pointed about those types of things. But we know that, you know, you, you can give someone shelter, and if they don't have shelter, then that's going to make them very happy. We need stability. We need a place to hang our hat,
Mm-hmm.
but there's no guarantee of happiness, if you
Mm.
give someone shelter, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
we're Abraham Maslow, the hierarchy of human needs
Mm-hmm.
pyramid says, we're you can take care of the body, and
Mm-hmm.
shelter does that, a place to sleep, bathe, prepare
Yeah.
food, hang out, but we need our higher we need opportunity for our higher needs to be developed, our love
Mm.
and belonging and connection needs,
Mm-hmm.
feelings of um, personal worth or skill, self
Mm.
development and creative expression. It's essential.
Mm-hmm.
So once we start creating space in our life for those activities, that's when we really start to unfold and live live truly living our best life rather than just surviving. We start to celebrate and unfold as well-rounded individuals when we provide opportunities for that.
Sure. Yeah. I hear similar pieces to the sustaining creativity work where that foundation is about safety and having shelter is a safety piece. And if we don't have it, it's hard to get to the higher needs.
That's right. Sure. You know, when we dedicate space to an activity, we give ourselves a much greater chance of success
Mm-hmm.
in that. If you don't have a kitchen, it's hard to prepare food and maintain a healthy diet, and
Mm-hmm.
Leonardo da Vinci, he painted the Mona Lisa, it's which recently turned 500 years old. It was the early 1500s when he started it, but it took him more than a decade to finish that work.
Wow.
And he if he didn't have an art studio
Mm-hmm.
where he could set it aside when he was didn't have the inspiration, or he had other paying projects that took priority, and so
Yeah.
when he's doing other things, and then when he had moments of inspiration or gaps in time from other work, he could
Mm-hmm.
come back to it, without a dedicated space to do his art, it may not have been finished, and
Sure.
so dedicating space to an activity, any activity,
Mm.
is going to really help us succeed in that. It doesn't just
Mm-hmm.
take, we say practice makes perfect. Sure, it takes time and effort to become accomplished at something, even if it's just for yourself, a hobby.
Mm-hmm.
But what's missing from that common sense formula is it also takes space. We have to create
Mm.
space um, to do it, whether we're exercising or reading or cooking or sleeping, everything like that. So for me, supporting people's creativity comes from asking, what do you like to do for creative expression?
Yeah.
List a few things. Let's look back into your childhood. What sparked joy for you
Mm.
there, or what do you like to do now? It depends on where you are. Sometimes when life gets busy, um, whether it's demands from work or family, one of the first things that people tend to cut out of their life to save time is their creative activities. I
Yeah.
used to play the cello for 2 hours a day, but now I've got kids and just can't do it, and
Right.
so, if your cello is locked in a closet
Mm.
and all you have is 10 minutes, cello is not happening today. But
Mm-hmm.
if you have a little alcove, that
Mm.
where the cello lives, with just a cover over it,
Mm-hmm.
then if you have 10 minutes, you can step in and just play a few scales or one song, and
Mm-hmm.
sure, it's not, an hour or two like it used to be, but it's still enough to keep the spark alive.
Mm-hmm.
And, doing the things that feed us, every little step we take in the direction of our dreams, sets up a positive feedback loop. And it lets us
Mm-hmm.
know that, what, my life is possible.
Mm.
Things that feed me, things that are valuable to me, are achievable and attainable. And that's
Mm-hmm.
a very hopeful outlook to live in, a very hopeful perspective for life. And so, that's my wish for everyone, is that they have opportunity
Mm.
to be themselves a little bit more. I want everyone to be able to stretch into their potential, into their possibility, just a little bit. Gandhi said, I
Absolutely.
want freedom for the full expression of my personality. And so,
Mm.
that's the dream. That's the American dream too. That was, he's from India. That's the East, but wisdom of the West. The founding forefathers said in the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness.
Mm-hmm.
It's fundamental. So
Yeah,
defining that happiness and then shaping the space for it, because we spend so much time in our homes. Half of our lives is spent in our homes, right? So that
absolutely.
environment plays a huge impact, and we want it to work for us.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, I'm curious, hearing the clear passion you have for what you do. When
sure.
you were younger, has architecture or building or design always been in your life? Like,
Yeah.
what are the
Mhm.
early memories of creativity that you have from childhood?
Yeah. It was always there. Um, my favorite activities as a child were placemaking, you know, um, creating scenes, setting it up. I've a lot of my friends, we'd play with action figures, little boy dolls. Or if I was playing with the girls, we play girl dolls. We play dollhouse and things like that. I didn't have a problem in either type of play. But I found that many of my peers would make the dolls interact and go on adventures together and
Mm.
say things and have conversations, and they would, engage,
Hmm.
and I could do that to a degree, but I found that what I really enjoyed was actually just setting the stage, and
Mm.
building the landscape and putting the figures into position. And once I got it just the way I wanted, I just enjoyed sitting back and observing and seeing it and just taking in the scene that had been set. I felt
Mm.
like my at that point my work was done. It was like, okay, I set the stage. Now you all go live happily ever after. And so this is the designer's mindset, and it was there from
Hmm.
childhood. It was just a natural aptitude for me. And then even in, as a tween, I was sketching, floor plans on graph paper and stuff. It's
Hmm.
just as play for me. That was fun. And
Hmm.
so, I didn't actually decide to be an architect until I was in my mid 20s. For some reason, all my life, people had said, "Oh, you're going to be an artist because you draw so well. Oh, you're going to be a carpenter, because you like to build." I was always working on tree forts and stuff, and no one ever said the word architect. So I didn't have, that guidance.
Mm.
But when I realized it as a young man, going, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? I'd already built and sold one company and was sort of in this
Mm.
kind of a transition. And I said, what am I going to do? And I was like, oh, bing, light bulb went off. Of course, I'm going to be an architect. I look back and, we could connect the dots in reverse. So it
Sure.
was always there. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. I'm I've spoken to several architects on this podcast, and
Yeah.
your take on the kind of weaving in and combining so many other what feels like philosophies to
Uh-huh. Sure.
architecture. I'm curious, how did you gather those, or what was that
Hmm.
spark that helped you bring all of them together into your conscious home design work?
Yeah. Um, so I'm a thoughtful person to
Mm.
begin with, a creative sort of bohemian. My life had always been about I want to live my truth, and
Mm.
sort of a very experiential thing. The idea that I would separate my work from my lifestyle never really worked for me. It
Mm.
wasn't. I don't compartmentalize very much.
Okay.
I'm very much a live my walk my life, so whatever I do, I jump in with both feet all the way
Mm.
because I'm living it. um, I believe in personal growth, and I
Mm.
feel like the universe is so rich with creativity. It's so alive, and I
Mhm.
want to feel like I'm in that flow, like I'm connected and
Mm.
tuned in, and I'm part of the rhythm of life. And so that's led me to meditation and trying to increase my sensitivities. And if I have a thought that pops into my mind or an inspiration, I want to know, hey, where did that come from? Was
Mm.
that just come out of my subconscious because I saw it on TV and I'm just being programmed of what I'm supposed to want? Or did that come from from something else? Did I just pick
Mhm.
up on someone else's thought? Was that a moment? Was that a telepathic moment of sympathetic resonation that I had because I'm in proximity with another person? Or did that, I wanted to be able to identify the source of my creative insights. And so
Mhm.
for me, that meant, that meant meditation, to
Mhm.
have to calm the thoughts and get clarity,
Mhm.
and it also meant, as a young adult, not drinking anymore, and
Mhm.
not
Mhm.
even smoking marijuana or anything, which I did in my late teens and early 20s for a few years. I had fun socializing with peers in that
Mhm.
way, but I found it clouded my own insight and my own creative,
Mhm.
clarity. And
Mhm.
so I left all that behind in favor of, um, you know, it was a commitment to what I value more.
Mhm.
More than having a good time was being in tune for
Mhm.
me.
Mhm.
So yeah.
So that's how it all comes together. I appreciate that.
Well,
And
yeah. So I just I draw on all of those things because that's who I am.
mhm.
I wasn't, like I mentioned with the book, I didn't want to just create another style guide.
Right.
I wanted to understand what truly makes people happy. What
Yeah.
what really helps, what's when you say best life, what's actually going to support best life? What does that mean? Because best
Mhm.
life, happy, these are big words that are just too vague. Let's get
Yeah.
specific. What does that actually mean and look like for you? Is there
Sure.
anything that's universal for all people, like Maslow's? you know
Mhm.
and then and if we can get those big rocks in there, the universal principles, then
Mhm.
we can start putting in the smaller pebbles that are specific and unique to you as an individual, and then we can start building that way. So
Mm.
it was just it's a desire to help people.
Mhm.
I said, I can help people more deeply
Yeah.
by in this way, art, because the highest calling of architecture is to help people live happily ever after. you know
Mm. Mhm.
So I said, well, okay, well, what does that really mean? How can I do that? And so
Mhm.
architecture shouldn't just be in a bubble, because architecture is about buildings.
Yeah.
But if I want human happiness as my goal, well, I have to draw on what the professions that live in that arena have
Mhm.
discovered.
Mm.
And so architecture needs to take cues and needs to learn and grow from philosophy, from spirituality, from
Mhm.
artists and creativity, from psychology and therapy, and even sports, the mind body connection that
Mhm.
we've learned so much about in the Olympics. My personal trainer says, don't just work out absent-mindedly. He says, when you're working on this particular exercise, I want 100% of your concentration on the muscle groups that are being activated.
Mm.
And in 6 months with him, I can do better than 3 years on my own.
Mm.
And so that
Mhm.
kind of mindfulness, the mind body connection, we know that's true.
Yeah.
So my job as the architect is to help people put the mind body environment connection to work for them.
Mm.
It's less understood. The mind body connection is fairly well understood, but
Yeah.
still a lot of room to grow. But the mind body environment connection is even less understood. So that's how I help people,
I
create a
love
supportive
that.
environment. Yeah.
Yeah, the mind body environment piece. You've talked about happiness and helping
Yeah.
people find happiness or be in that space of happiness.
Hmm.
Could you share a little bit about that? It sounds like there is some universal principles to it
Sure.
and how people can maybe ask themselves some questions to help them on their journey.
Mm. I think every society has approached it in their own way over
Mhm.
the millenniums. You know, we have a modern concept from Japan called ikigai, which is sort of this overlapping of skill and
Mhm.
interest and service, and the sweet spot of what your best life looks like. Um, Harvard did the study of adult happiness where they tracked thousands of individuals and to see how they did, and just
Mhm.
check them in over their entire life. It started in 1938 and is still going on to
Wow.
this day. So, they're on to multiple generations now as original participants, passed on.
Mhm.
And they discovered that the single biggest predictor of people's happiness and their life expectancy, interestingly enough, because generally happy people live longer,
Hmm.
not always, but statistically.
Yeah.
They found that the quality of your relationships, are
Mm.
were the biggest thing. And intuitively that makes sense. We all say, "Oh, of course, that's why I get up out of bed in the day to do things for my family."
Mm.
It's my reason for living. Your friends and family are everything, and we all say that. But once you have the math behind it, now instead of just being this wish list, it now suddenly we're justified in moving it over onto the must have list. It gives us
Mm.
permission to prioritize.
Hmm.
And so, I'll say, well, in conscious home design, what can we do to optimize, to create spaces that support and encourage, relationships, positive
Hmm.
interactions, in all their diverse forms. Relationship is a lot more than just, a romantic partnership. We have so many kinds of relationship. The Greeks have 7 different words for love, depending on what flavor, how it shows up between parent and child, or two best friends, or between a person in their community, or
Yeah.
is it between, the significant other or spouse,
Hmm.
so agape or eros or filial and storge, et cetera, et cetera. So many different ways that relationship shows up. So, you know, doing that is a big one. And then
Mm.
Maslow's hierarchy of human
Hmm.
needs, looking at that. So those are places to start. The workbook, which you glance through, is about asking those questions. It helps
Mm.
people. It's sort of a methodology to go through.
Hmm.
And we all love to do these tests. Like, hey, what's my astrology, or what's my human design, or Enneagram,
Hmm.
or my Myers Briggs. We like to do these little tests because they reveal things that it's like, oh yeah, I always knew that about myself, but somehow seeing it now in writing is like, ah,
Right.
yes,
The confirmation.
exactly. It's a validation of a
Yeah.
vague feeling you always knew, but now it's like, oh, okay, I'm not weird. I'm supposed to
Hmm.
be that way. There's a
Hmm.
place for me. And so these things are very fun. So the conscious home design workbook, I worked with someone who's a licensed therapist, has a master's in social work and dual master's and a master's in psychotherapy.
Mm.
And so I said, hey, read the book and then work with me on writing a workbook with exercises, fun, thoughtful, creative questions that we can ask to make sure we're drawing out the very best answers from people. So
Mm.
um, that's sort of a methodology and a framework where we get at the core, of what makes you happy
Yeah.
as a person,
I
so that we
love
can
that.
hopefully create a space that supports
Right.
that you can grow into the best version of yourself.
Yes, yes. The some of the questions that I was reading really made me think about my own relationship, not only to the people and the environment, but also the art that I have in spaces or the
Yes,
plants
yes.
that I have in spaces and how those relationships actually carried more weight in certain spaces for me than others. And that I found really fascinating to like sit with.
That's so powerful, Mari, because conscious home design, it meets you where you are,
Mm.
and so it's not an all or nothing, sure, if you build a brand new home from scratch, that's a quantum leap in terms of being able to shape your future
Yeah.
and have a hand in your destiny. But
Hmm.
even little things, little 2% shifts that you can make around, even if you're just living in a rental,
Hmm.
you can do little things that are very supportive, especially over time. They compound. It's like the
Hmm.
butterfly effect.
Hmm.
Small, big outcomes have sensitive dependence on the initial conditions. And so if we
Hmm.
can just be more mindful about the initial conditions that we're putting into practice, into
Hmm.
play in our lives, and they can grow into substantial things. So yeah, it's very powerful because when you do the assessment, now you can find where you're well supported, where
Hmm.
you particularly are. In my home, oh, in my home, I happen to have this very well supported. But here's a gap, whereas another
Hmm.
person, they may be support, everyone's going to have their own gaps. And then
Hmm.
once you have the tools to be able to assess, oh, here it is. It's I need this or that. Then you can start to look at, once you've identified the problem, well, that's half the battle. It's not knowing what the challenge is. Then you're floating
Yeah.
around in limbo with this vague sense, hey, things aren't quite as good as they should be. What's
Hmm.
missing? So the framework is about being able to identify, oh, here's what it is, ding, 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 ding. And now
Mm,
that I know, knowing's half the battle, you can look to make little corrections, course corrections.
yeah.
Yeah, and retune, refine our inner compass, our GPS, set those coordinates.
I love that reminder, the retuning and refining those pieces. And you strike me
Yeah,
as someone who is into so many things. And as you
sure.
said, you live it. But in your life today, who or what is bringing you inspiration?
So many things. Inspiration comes everywhere. I mean, I can find inspiration in nature. I look out and just see what nature is doing.
Mm-hmm.
Both just the beauty of nature is inspiring, but also if I look at the systems behind nature, and the
Mm,
cycles of nature, and I look at that framework and that structure and those processes. There's creativity in that. There's structure, but it's also inspiring,
mm-hmm.
creatively. What can I borrow from? I also get tremendous insight from other artists and other
Mm,
creatives. I love going to open studio events, and going around. It's like,
mm.
wow, I never would have thought of that, and I get such a charge from others,
Mm,
as well. And then I also get a lot of creativity from within, practicing meditation. I can in fact, it's sometimes I have to really work to keep the mind at bay and say, well, no, I'm really trying to focus on on pranayama or pratyahara here, and these creative inspirations are a distraction. The fountain of creativity just bubbles up as soon as I
yeah.
try to quiet the mind. It
Mm.
comes up dramatically. So I have to keep a notebook nearby so I can jot those things down and get back to my meditation. And so it's creativity comes it can come from any direction if you practice looking for the signs
Mm.
of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That practice paying attention to the to where and
Yeah.
when and how it shows up
I
in your
mean, sure,
space.
for me, but I think people may have their own, everyone may have their own unique way. I
Hmm.
actually sometimes when I'm driving, I
Hmm.
find driving to be, especially like a long, not traffic driving, through the
Sure.
city and stoplights. But if I'm on a road trip,
Mm.
incredible downloads will come. Not download, that's not the right word, but incredible the mind, because it's just enough activity for me to be alert, but
Hmm.
it's enough routine, especially if I have a straight road where I can scan ahead
Yeah.
to allow enough to free up enough space in my mind to where I can run a creative program at the same time as
Mm.
running the driving program. My I have enough RAM to multitask a little bit. And I find
Sure.
that driving is a time where creative insight or creative
Mm.
thinking happens,
Hmm.
um, or laying in bed, either in the morning or not so much in the evening usually because I'm tired, but in the morning I can if I have time to lay in bed a little bit longer, that's
Hmm.
amazing creativity
Mm.
can come during that time. So um, everyone will find and does find their own channels
Mm.
for
Hmm.
creativity and inspiration to come through. But that's a handful of ones that I notice in my own
Yeah.
experience.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of those pieces. And this has been
Sure.
such an incredible conversation. I know we could talk for so many more hours, but I have one
Yeah.
last question.
Sure.
What does it feel like in your body to be creative?
Oh boy. It's very activating. It's
Mm,
energizing. It's excitement, but there's peace at the same time. There's like a negative peace, which is like peace and nothing's happening,
mm-hmm,
but there's also a positive peace where there's peace and something is happening, and so because there's also activity without peace, which is more like chaos, but then there's activity with peace, which is,
mm.
flow state. And so it's an excited peace.
I love that. I know
Yeah.
exactly what you're talking about. Well, thank you, Taylor, so much for taking the time to join me today. If people want to learn more about the work you have, your book, your workbook, how could they go about doing that?
Oh, conscioushome design.com is my website.
Great.
And my book and the audiobook, if you like to listen, is available there as a bundle with the workbook. It's all available as an instant download if you want. And if you want a physical copy, it costs a little bit more, but I'll sign it and mail it to you. And you also get the digital download immediately too. So you get both. Something for the library. Um, as well. So conscioushomedesign.com. And if anyone wants to pick my brain about because they want to actually do something on their home or they want some they've done the workbook and now they want some feedback about, do a consultation. There's a contact me form that they can do. So certainly reach out.
Perfect.
Conscioushhomedesign.com.
I love it. Well,
Thanks.
I will put links in show notes so people have very easy access. And thank you so much for taking the time to join me. This has been such a fantastic conversation.
Sure, Mari. Yeah, for me too. It's made it and very joyful. And I hope that anything I've said has also activated the joy and creativity in other creatives that are listening and having and partaking in this conversation, in our conversation.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Thanks for listening to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. We'd love to keep in touch, so follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We are at Sustaining Creativity. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Tag your friends and family so they can listen too. We love to hear from you, so leave your reviews, comments, and questions. Check out our website, sustainingcreativity.com, for upcoming offerings and creativity coaching. Tune in Tuesdays for our next episode. And remember, with creativity, anything's possible.